This podcast contains discussions around mental health and suicide. We understand that these discussions may be difficult or triggering to listen to, and if so, now may not be the best time for you to listen in. If at any stage you or a mate requires support, please call Mates in Construction on 1300 642 111. Our helpline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Mates stronger together.
We're doing this podcast today from Turrbal Land, the Yagara Nation, and I'd like to start by acknowledging their elders, past, present and emerging. As most of you know, our First Nations people, our Aboriginal brothers and sisters, when we're talking about mental health and suicide prevention, this is causing devastation in their communities. The result of intergenerational trauma from colonisation. And what we do at Mates is we stand in solidarity with them. We want to make certain that they are respected, that they have dignity, that they have justice, but especially that we are part of that healing process. So there's a lot of work to do in Australia in this space, but together we can get there. So I just want to acknowledge the work that has been done by Aboriginal brothers and sisters. We're on Aboriginal land, always was, always will be. We're also talking this podcast, we're talking about suicide, we're talking about people who have had their own suicide struggles, those who have lost mates and family members, and we know the trauma of this is quite impactful. So many coulda, woulda, shouldas. And so I just want to acknowledge those people who may be listening to this podcast who have walked that trail and let you know that we hear you and acknowledge the pain and the trauma you've been through and may still be going through.
All right, welcome to another podcast episode with Mates in Construction. Very grateful to be joined by Josh today, who was the developer of the Apprentice Resilience Program, really focused on helping apprentices deal with day-to-day stuff and life stuff, just to help them get through their apprenticeship and their trade, I guess, both short and long term, to help them have a better experience in working in the trade space and the construction space. Thanks for coming along, Josh. It's great to chat with you, mate.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Damo.
Awesome. So what we might start with is just a little bit about you. So how you started, I guess, in the trade space and what your background is. And, we can chat a little bit more about the training space that you've done quite a bit of work in as well, if that's all good.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
It's great because when we do the apprentice program, we do a bit of a similar thing when we kick off, is we get everyone to go around and have a bit of a yarn and let us know who they are, where they're from, and how they got started in the industry and sort of what they're enjoying about it.
Yep.
So I've got this one down pat.
Not your first rodeo, for want of better words.
Nah.
Yeah.
Josh, I'm a carpenter from the Gold Coast, and I've been in and around the construction industry for my whole working life. So about 17 years now, I think. And basically, I started my apprenticeship when I finished year 12 because I had no idea what I wanted to do. But being able to cruise around, no shirt on, building houses in the back of the Gold Coast, listening to Triple J, and seemed like a pretty good idea at the time, and so that's what I rolled with, and I've absolutely loved it. So basically, started off building houses, and then moved in, to sort of different roles, taking on more and more responsibility, and was really motivated to get towards sort of project management, site management type stuff.
Yeah, awesome.
And then had a bit of surgery and had some time off work and did some volunteering while I was sort of laid up.
Yep.
And was at a special school and was working with people and working with young people, and it was a pretty wild experience, and it kind of reset my priorities a bit. And so
cool.
That led me to wanting to use my experience and my background more people focused rather than project focused. Yep. And started working with some at-risk youth at a charity in Southeast Queensland, and then from there I went and worked at a training college dealing with carpentry apprentices and basically stayed there for, sort of 4 or so years. And what was really cool is that the cool part of the construction industry and the trades is, I finished my apprenticeship and it just opened up so many doors.
Yeah.
I've done everything from, being a shit kicker on site right through to running the show.
Yep.
It's taken me, all over the world to like strange and wonderful places.
Yep.
And then now I get to go out and catch up with apprentices and help them make sure that they're getting, they're having a good experience in their trade and looking after each other and looking after their mental health. So that is a little bit about me and my background and how I landed here at Mates.
Yeah. Hey, how was doing your apprenticeship and starting out in the game on the Gold Coast? I mean, it's a place that everybody wants to come and visit, particularly in recent years. I can imagine the lifestyle would have been pretty good. I mean, as a fellow Gold Coaster, one of the things I always notice is in the back of utes amongst tools is usually a surfboard, for guys to either start the day or finish the day going for a surf. So how was that for you, man?
It was amazing. We have a pretty massive Australia in general has a massive construction sort of presence, and the Gold Coast, there's a lot of luxury houses, a lot of like high-end houses. We got a lot of retail. So there was so much there. And like, I was fortunate to start my apprenticeship building really high-end architecturally designed, full timber houses out the back in the hinterland, overlooking Hinds Dam and stuff.
Wow. Yeah, nice.
So that was pretty cool. But then you had the other end of the spectrum where you've got like, full EBA jobs, massive sort of high-rise towers and civil works and stuff. So it was a really diverse ecosystem of work, and it was unreal, just to be basically living in paradise, building cool stuff and getting paid quite well for it as well. So
it is a perfect, I think, description of the coast in general, just diverse. It's like you said, it's that high-rise luxury right through to lifestyle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. So might get you to talk a little bit about the teaching end of things that you did for about 4 years, and continue on to where we your relationship with Mates nowadays.
Yeah, cool. So I worked at an RTO, or registered training organisation, and they operated in the carpentry space, and they basically dealt. If you don't know, an RTO basically is kind of like a TAFE or a college that helps apprentices get qualified. And so we've got a few different sort of branches of that in the trade space. Some of them are government run like TAFE. You've got other private ones. And so the one I worked at was a private one, and it was they did site-based assessments. And it was pretty cool because we worked really closely with the apprentices, and it's kind of like almost similar to a case management model. So they had their mentor or their trainer that they dealt with, and so you'd have a chat with them and you'd help them get through their training and stuff. And it was a really good experience because knowing what I went through when I was an apprentice, and then seeing some of these guys had similar issues, but also starting to see a change in attitudes around some of those things that we just kind of taken as a given in our industry. And people being more open to like getting help, offering help, accepting help, and just some healthy attitudes coming through. So it was a really fantastic experience for me.
Yeah, look, it's interesting you sort of mentioned there around how you were treated when you were an apprentice. And I mean, things have certainly changed a lot, but we've still got a long way to go. There's still certainly instances of not great treatment of apprentices. And people in general, I guess. It's not exclusive to apprentices. Might get you to talk a little bit about the changes that you've seen from when you did your time as an apprentice through to now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's been pretty drastic, to be honest. And even when we talk to apprentices now, we talk things about bullying and some of the attitudes and stuff, and just the change in perception. We were bottom of the food chain sort of thing, and I was never severely bullied as an apprentice, but just those little pranks and that sort of thing that kind of grate on you over time. But I knew some of my mates that got quite badly bullied. The dynamic and the power imbalance between apprentices and employers and even supervisors, and the differences in culture and generational shifts. I know when I was coming through my apprenticeships, phones had just started to get the capability for photographs and for web browsing. So we were just texting madly, but we didn't have all of that stuff going on there. But the guys that I was doing my apprenticeship with used to have to potentially walk into town to make a call, or potentially dial an operator. I don't know, depending on their age, and I wasn't alive at that time. So seeing some of those cultural changes, and just some of the attitudes, around a lot of our socializing was based around, drug and alcohol use. You'd go cut loose with the boys on the weekends and stuff. And then as I got into that training role, some of the apprentices were like way more proactive around, moderating those things.
Interesting.
Yeah, and even some of the sort of older millennial employers, so the guys that had done their trade and were starting to put on apprentices,
Yep.
their attitude and their mindset was no, I had this happen to me. I'm not going to let this happen to my apprentice.
Yeah, amazing.
So that was a really, really refreshing and really encouraging sort of experience to have, was seeing that the industry sort of, improving.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So when did you first learn about Mates?
The first time I heard about Mates, I think I was working on the airport link. So that would have been 2010 or 2011.
Yep.
Which I think was early days.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it certainly was. Cool. So about 2010, 2011, you learnt about Mates.
Yep.
How then did it progress over the years where you actually, I guess, touch base with Mates, or how that sort of played out, that you learnt more about what they do?
So I was aware of them and I'd seen their stuff around. I hadn't had the opportunity to get into any of their training. And just because being a subbie and sort of bouncing around sites and projects as we tend to do. And so it was my mates that I actually noticed had like stickers on their hard hats and stuff. And I'd ask them about it. And, oh, bro, it's this, it's that, it's awesome. So I had this, I kind of knew sort of knew what it was, but I hadn't had any experience with it until I was working with apprentices. And we had that kind of mentoring-y sort of case manager relationship where you're dealing with them one-to-one, and they would disclose things, and it puts you into a bit of panic mode, when you're on the other end of the phone and a young bloke or a young woman lets you know that there's some pretty hardcore stuff going on in their life. And you're like, shit, what do I do? So I kind of timidly called up the 1300 number and was like, oh, listen, it's not for me, but can I put someone through? What do you guys do? And I got one of the case managers who I believe was still here, James. And he ran me through and he's like, yeah, mate, no, give him the number, tell him to call us. We'll sort him out. We can't loop you back in once we've spoken to him, but we'll help him out. And so I started doing that. I started saying, listen, let's when you get off the phone, I'm going to text you this number, give him a call and let him know what's been going on. And then I'll talk to you later on in the week. And so I would do that. I would follow up with the apprentice that I and I go, well, how was it? Because I was genuinely curious. And,
of course,
and they were like, yeah, it was good. It was good. I feel better having just talked to him and stuff. And so, that was where I sort of first became aware and started touching base with mates. And it was awesome. And the feedback I got was awesome. And so when a few years later, an opportunity came up and I applied for a field officer role. And at the time, it wasn't right for me. But that was what connected me up with mates in the first place, which is kind of how I ended up here today. So,
amazing. Yeah. So fast forward to, I guess, it was about a year ago that you started working for Mates?
Early last year.
And that was, I guess, primarily to develop the Apprentice Resilience Program, which, given what you've described leading up to now, sounds like the perfect role for you. Because you obviously give a shit about the apprentices and stuff that they were going through. And let's talk a little bit about the report that identified that apprentices were doing it a bit tougher than looking at statistics, a bit tougher than the broader sort of construction community. And how that led into the development of the apprentice program.
Sweet. The report is amazing in terms of its like quality and scope and what they actually did. And so Mates was sort of always had something on the go for apprentices, because that initial report that we did for the whole construction industry identified that apprentices were at a greater risk. And so when we're out talking to people, we often like to drop some stats and we say, look, the average construction worker is about 6 times more likely to die from suicide than they are from a workplace accident. For an apprentice, it's about 10 times. And so then we ask them, we say, well, listen, like, you guys have just started your apprenticeship. You've probably done your white card. You may have done some TAFE training. You will have done swims, a site induction, a start card, all of that safety documentation you've done. Have you ever seen mental health and suicide listed as a hazard or a risk and controlled in any way? And they all sort of sit there and shake their heads, no. And when you put it into perspective, the risk, of dying at work versus, suicide, it's massive. And some of the sites we go onto, you might have to fill out a 2-page form to use a platform ladder that's, 4 foot high. And so it's that contrast is pretty wild. And so Mates has always had something going because we've always known about it. But there was a point where they decided we need to have a look at what we're doing
Yeah.
because it might not be that accessible. And they did a bunch of reports and they sort of said, all right, well, we're going to have another look and see how apprentices today are tracking. And they did this these panel interviews with the university. So the researchers got apprentices in a room and they interviewed them and they sort of found out what was going on and what they thought might be causing some of those levels of distress that were present in the earlier studies. And from those interviews, they devised, I guess, a list of questions. And I'm probably butchering this explanation because I'm not an academic. But, but they got a survey together and they did this. We did this thing called Speak Up, Be Heard. And what happened was they put it all up on the web. They got together with the Department of Employment, Small Business and Training, and they're the Queensland government branch of that looks after apprenticeships. And so every single construction industry apprentice in Queensland was reached out to at that point by a text message, and they had the opportunity to complete the survey. And from what I understand, by research standards, they got a really good response rate. So out of the 30,000 they sent out, they got quite a few came back. Most of the female apprentices that were contacted actually completed the full survey, which is an interesting one. And then we got the data back. The university went and worked on it, and they produced this report for us. And it was called The Impact of Workplace Bullying on Mental Health and Suicidality in Queensland Construction Industry Apprentices. And it's an amazing report because it's got everything that we did. It's got the people that we talked to. We did industry consultation. It makes recommendations. But there are a number of really shocking findings came out of this report. So 27 and a bit % of apprentices had experienced workplace bullying.
Wow.
Yeah, and to give some context to that number, if we look at the rest of Australia, it's about 9.5% have regular Aussies get bullied at work. So when you look at it like that, they're like
That's triple.
Yeah. And aside to that was 20% of them had said that the bullying was severe. And so I couldn't actually find any stats on severe bullying, but assume that regular Aussies are severely bullied less than they are bullied normally, which you'd assume it's way less than 10%. So we know it's a massive uptick with bullying. And that was correlated with an increased incidence of thoughts about suicide in the previous 12 months. So it was around 30% for apprentices that had thought about suicide in the previous 12 months. Now that's pretty bad, but I mentioned our female apprentices, most of them actually did the full survey. For our female apprentices, it was up around half of them. So about 43% had thought about suicide in the previous 12 months, which is crazy.
And I mean, coupled with the fact that young people in broader society are at an elevated risk anyway, it's just a recipe for disaster.
It is. It is. And depending on the stats that you go off, for context on that, 2.5% to 5% nationally. So if you drag that out in a very unacademic way, some of our apprentices are close to 20 times more likely to have thought about taking their life in any given year than the rest of the population.
Wow.
Which is wild. Approximately 30% of apprentices had quality of life issues that could indicate depression, which is up there. And then 13% of apprentices had indicators of potential severe mental illness. And so that was people who needed, immediate help. And then to top it all off, they were found to have low levels of mental health and suicide literacy. So pretty sort of grim stuff when you look at it like that. But it was also found that they had really strong positive attitudes towards improving mental health and preventing suicide in our industry. So,
and that's maybe where the generational shift is coming from, around their attitude towards that change. And
And look, those numbers are really bad, but it's important to focus on some of the positives because from that we know that 70% of our apprentices that did the survey said that they were doing well and that their supervisor treated them well and looked after them and respected them as a person. So that's a fantastic result.
For sure.
But those other numbers are just too high.
So I mean, from that then, the Apprentice Resilience Program was clearly identified as necessary and highly important to kickstart.
They did some industry consultation. They went out and they spoke with employers, industry groups, unions, and they said, what do you think? What can we do? And from that, there was a number of recommendations made. There were 8 in total. The Apprentice program came based on the back of a recommendation to do resilience training with apprentices around financial management, alcohol and other drugs, mental health and suicide literacy, and workplace bullying and workplace rights. So it was workplace rights, not workplace bullying, but because the scope of the report was mainly centered on bullying, that's included as well.
Right.
Another recommendation was that we do training with supervisors as well. So it's not just focusing on the apprentices because they're the ones dealing with the dramas.
Of course.
It was about more broadly making the industry more resilient and having that rising tide lift all boats.
Yeah.
So we have a supervisor training program that we run with supervisors.
Yeah.
And then there's a toolbox that we run with the whole of the construction industry. So we'll go out to sites and we'll do a toolbox talk and just make them aware of some of the things that our apprentices are dealing with and some of the options and things that we have to actually improve that experience and improve our industry.
Yeah, brilliant. So talk to me a little bit about then, with those recommendations, what's been the process of developing the Apprentice Resilience Program?
So we had a bit of a look at what was out there and we had a bit of a look at what we'd done in the past. And then we basically went, all right, well, what's going to be the most accessible for industry? Because some of the initiatives that are out there are fantastic, like really comprehensive things, but people think apprentices and they think paid not that well, but they don't realize that the costs that are built into having an apprentice and it's quite an expensive thing to have an apprentice not at work.
Yeah.
So we had to think, well, how can we meaningfully catch up with these young guys and these young girls in a way that we can make sure we cover as many as possible without, the employers, worrying about having to spend massive amounts of money. And so we were focusing on making something that was accessible and enjoyable. So we settled on a sort of half day, which matches some of the things around, that we've done around best practice with the other training that we do. Our connectors around 4 hours as well. And then we had a look at the recommendations and basically decided, well, we'll stick to the scope of the recommendations because the academics obviously have done the research and they've spoken to the apprentices, but we need to go out on a basis of co-design and continuous improvement. So we focused on really early getting a pilot going and then asking the apprentices what they thought worked, what they thought was relevant and getting as much feedback as possible. And then that way we give them the opportunity to contribute to the program so that they can actually help the apprentices that go through it after them benefit. And that's been the process moving forward, So we had those guiding principles around, what they thought we should talk to them about. And we basically we every single time we do one, we go back to the drawing board and we go, okay, what worked that time? What did they respond well to? What seems to be working overall? And we've involved consultants, psychologists, social workers, people in training, all sorts of stuff to kind of make it as best as we can. And that's what we've been doing for about 12 months now.
And it's really a part of the Mates ethos is to develop programs that are what industry wants and needs from the industry perspective, not, hey, let's theoretically come up with stuff that we think might work and deliver it, and that's what we deliver. So great approach for sure. One of the things that I found really interesting earlier this year, we did a bunch of on-camera interviews with apprentices who had completed the Apprentice Resilience training, and it was apprentices with a fairly wide age gap. So from young people to people in their mid-40s, a couple of which had already completed trades and were having a career change. And one of the consistent things that people said, I wish that this had existed earlier on, which to me is a really obviously a very strong testament to how much things are changing within the industry. But even for people who are outside of their apprenticeship or maybe halfway through their trade career or a little bit older, there's elements and learning in there that are relevant for everyone. So I might get you to talk a little bit about that as well, just some of the items that you deliver as part of this training.
Yeah. So they were great groups. So that was the Plumbing Industry Climate Action Centre at Beenleigh, who are a fantastic supporter. They actually put all of their incoming apprentices through the resilience program because they're really focused on strengthening their industry and making sure that their apprentices finish their trade. So it's a strong signal to an apprentice. When you do that, it's a strong signal like, hey, we're aware of what you're going through and we care about you. So now it's really cool getting that feedback and hearing those things. And that was one of the things that we wanted it to be. We wanted it to be as accessible and digestible as possible. And even though a lot of the work around it was aimed at 17 to 24, there's a growing, massive demand for apprentices. So, and mature age apprentices, like people are turning around and going, yeah, sweet, I'll be a plumber, I'll be a pipe turner, you know, and they love it. And it's really cool. And so when we have those guys in the room, they share a lot of their experience. And ultimately what we would prefer to do, rather than, you know, talking at them and running them through the training session, is to sit them down and facilitate a conversation. So this is all about creating some dialogue amongst their peers and their mates about the experiences that they're having, they're going to have, and how to make it as good as possible. And so some of those, one of the things in one of those classes that came up today when we were talking about, you know, looking after ourselves and looking after each other and the stresses that we encounter in the industry, is one of the guys put his hands up, and he was an older bloke, and he said, I was really worried about coming into college today because I thought I was going to come in here and there was going to be a bunch of 15-year-olds that knew more than me, and I was going to feel really out of place. And after that, everyone was like, oh yeah, I was stressing too, blah, blah, blah. As soon as that happened, the tension in the room dropped and everyone was just keen to have a chat. And that's what's really important is everything that Mates does is about connecting people up, where we do community development. And so when we can do that well, it means that we can hit with our message really, really easily, because you've got a receptive audience who's open to looking out for each other and looking out for themselves. And so everything that we talk about, being an evidence-based and research-based charity, we do a lot of research to make sure that what we're doing is best practice, but we also make sure that the way that we deliver it is cohort appropriate, because, you know, you go out there with really technical stuff and you're talking to construction workers who very clever, like blokes and women, but they're busy, you know, they don't have time to be, you know, mentally digesting all of these complex concepts. So
for sure,
we just go out there and we have a chat to them about, you know, finances, about workplace rights, workplace bullying, drugs and alcohol, mental health, seeking help, offering help, that sort of thing, accepting help. And ultimately it's just trying to get them to talk about it, because they're the ones that are going to do it. And when they say that to us, one thing that always sticks up to me is, like, they might have done something around budgeting or something like that in school, but if they didn't have context for it, it's kind of wasted.
That's
so,
right.
you know, you might do a budgeting exercise when you're in year 11 living with your parents, and then you come out into the real world and you're like, why didn't anyone prepare me for this? And it's like, well, they did. You just didn't. You couldn't apply it at the time. So
and your understanding of those concepts shifts when you're paying rent, when you're paying for a phone bill, when you're looking for a fuel budget each week, or you want to save for a holiday or whatever it may be. So
And there's massive amounts of power even just in normalizing some of these things, you know, like a lot of what Mates does is all about normalizing and giving people language and changing culture. And so when we go out and talk to them, we normalize, you know, like some of these concepts, and it changes their attitudes. They're like, oh yeah, okay, I thought it was just me struggling when apparently it's pretty common. And so that in and of itself is super powerful.
Absolutely. So we're now end of August 2023. Where is the program at as it stands in terms of delivery and implementation?
Yep. So it's ripping. We're out there doing it. It's all over Queensland. Basically, we've gone Central Queensland, Far North Queensland. Any organisation or business that's in contact with construction industry apprentices can call us and get us out there, and we will do it at no cost to the organisation, because, you know, we're a gift from industry to industry.
Yep.
And part of that is that, and I mentioned we're evidence-based, best practice. You know, we're doing research in parallel with running the program. So we gather data and we analyze it. It's all done anonymously and ethically, but we've just done our first phase where we were reviewing some of the data to see how the programs are going. And I can't quote off exact figures at the moment, but the indication initially from the university was that some of the data indicated that we were having a statistically significant impact in the areas that we'd set out to change attitudes and ideally change behavior. So there was some really good results that came back from the uni. And again, I must stress that that I'm not 100% across them yet. But there was really positive. The early indications from that first phase were really positive. And so now we're refining how we do that research and that data gathering to make sure that when we get through the second phase, which is going to run till the end of this year, is we're doing it as best possible, and we're making sure that we gather all the right data and tick all the right boxes to try and have a really good impact with the people that we're connecting with.
For sure. And look, it's really important to acknowledge that that data collection process
Yep.
and analyzing process is a huge effort. It takes time,
Yep.
and it's hugely important that the data that we get and the outcomes that we get from that is credible and stands up to the appropriate rigor that it needs to, so that the information is relevant and it can be used in the best possible way. So, all in good time. So
Yeah, and it's interesting too working with the academics, like,
for sure.
you know, as someone with a trade background and even like, you know, coming from training, like have this really clear, that saying, you know, that the man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Like, and you know, the academics are a lot more, you know, nuanced in the way that they deal with things, and so it's been a really fascinating experience to see the back end of that and just how rigorous and like, you know, detailed everything is. So that's been a massive challenge, but it's amazing because being able to say definitively like, hey, listen, we know that this works, so we can focus on doing this. So it's really cool.
Brilliant. So where to from here? So is it, I guess, you know, now is it a continuation of delivery?
Yep. Yeah. So it's basically keep doing what we've been doing. And so we've got these programs that we're rolling out, and it's really cool because a lot of people come into contact with Mates, and a lot of what Mates does is about, you know, when things get rough and not reactive, but it's when the trouble hits. And so the apprentice program and the supervisor program and the toolbox, these are all about proactivity and they're about getting at problems and getting things sorted before they become a real issue. And so we're building that resilience into the industry and into some of these systems and giving them some tools and resources to use before it gets to the point where it's like, oh, I'm struggling, I need to call Mates.
For sure.
So that's a big push into the future. We obviously need to keep running the research and gathering data, and then basically, just getting in front of as many apprentices, supervisors, and sites as we can to keep rolling out the training and keep connecting Mates and helping each other out.
Amazing. So, Josh, you mentioned that up until now it's been delivered in Queensland. What's the plan for the future in terms of distribution of this training?
So keep smashing it out to Queenslanders. It was the Mates Queensland NT that's running the pilot, and the the funding, I believe, has come from the Queensland construction industry and some of our wonderful partners. So while we're running the pilot, we're focusing on Queensland, but the intention is that we continue to develop it and eventually offer it to apprentices wherever we've got a presence around the country, because we know that a big problem with apprentices, besides some of the stuff that we identified, is they have massive attrition and dropout rates.
For sure.
So a lot of them, they don't finish their apprenticeship, or they have to go through multiple employers, to get through their apprenticeship. And so if we can do something to bring those numbers down, or, to give them tools so that, they can deal with some of the stresses that they have proactively and get through when they're dealing with tough times and solve some of those problems, hopefully we can help more apprentices get through their trade.
For sure.
So ultimate goal would be, perfect world, we'd catch up with every apprentice in the country. Probably not going to happen, but we're going to try and get out there as many as humanly possible. So.
And look, if there's anybody listening who would like to facilitate a session for their apprentices, what's the process?
Get in touch with Mates via whatever method seems most appropriate to you, email, phone, that sort of thing. There'll be some details, I guess, in the podcast description.
For sure.
But yeah, get in contact. To run a session, we need about approximately 10 apprentices in a room for about 4 or 5 hours.
Yep.
And basically we sit them down and have a chat with them. Obviously, if you're a bit out there and you've only got 5 or 6 apprentices, we can work with it. But we do find it's better if we've got a full room, because it just means they're more surrounded by their peers, and those conversations are a bit more robust. But Queensland construction industry apprentices, so they do have to be in the construction industry. We'll go Far North Queensland, Central Queensland, Central West Queensland. You just tell us where to go, and we'll come out there and catch up with your apprentices.
So for sure, I guess 4 or 5 hours is a fair amount of time for an apprentice, given the pressures that the industry's under at the moment.
Yep.
But I guess that long-term investment of helping to try and keep apprentices in their trade and not leave their apprenticeship is a good outcome that this investment would hopefully help.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've hit the nail on the head with the fact that putting an apprentice on is an investment. And like an investment, for that to pay off, you need it to mature. And for an apprentice, that is finishing their apprenticeship. And so I want to acknowledge that they are expensive, and it isn't an easy undertaking to sacrifice, your apprentice's time for 4 or 5 hours, because you're paying their wages, but you're also dealing with lost productivity. But the benefits is that when they go through it, all right, we're going to feed them, we're going to give them some cool merch, we're going to give them some tools that give them resources to stay stronger and look after themselves and look after their mates. But we're also helping the businesses with meeting their obligations under the Workplace Health and Safety Act and the new Psychosocial Code of Practice.
Yep.
Now, a lot of this is about promoting and being proactive around psychosocial wellbeing. So we give the employers a statement of attendance. So they've got something to say that they've taken proactive action around helping protect their apprentices from some of these psychosocial hazards. And it's also providing supervision and training, which meets some of the obligations under the Section 19 of the Workplace Health and Safety Act. So it is an investment, and it's a massive signal. And we make a point of telling the apprentices when we catch up with them, like, your employer has invested a lot of money and a lot of resources into you being here today, and likewise, mates puts a lot of resources into running these sessions. So
for sure,
we want them to come out of this, stronger and more connected up with their mates and their industry. So it is an important consideration, but there are definitely benefits to doing the training.
100%. Josh, thanks heaps for talking us through not only your background and what's led you to work for Mates, but the processes and outcomes that you've developed so far. Developing the Apprentice Resilience Program. I've sat in a number of times, and it is a fantastic program, and the clear engagement from people involved, not only young people who are apprentices, but people who are, having a change of career or a little bit older, mature age apprentices, are clearly responding to the program really positively. So well done, mate.
Thank you, Damo. While I've got the chance, I'd just like to thank a lot of our industry partners and supporters that are out there, allowing us to do this work, and the people on site, like some of our, our connectors, our assist workers, our union delegates and stuff that are out there helping us facilitate this program and rolling it out. In particular, a lot of the guys from the CFMEU have been fantastic. The PPTU have been awesome as well in getting us in at the Plumbing Industry Climate Action Centre, the ETU. Basically, anyone who's out there, supporting the construction industry and supporting their mates, a massive thank you to all the wonderful work that you guys do, and our industry partners too. So, cheers.
Fantastic. Well said, mate. And of course, if you would like to host a session with the Apprentice Resilience Program with Josh or any of the field officers, give us a call on 1300 642 111 during business hours, and we'll be able to start the process to make that happen for you. So feel free to call at any time. And of course, if you or a mate are struggling at any stage, don't hesitate to reach out to a mate or give us a call on that same number, 1300 642 111. Mates is here 24/7. Take care.